Proportional Response, Book 1. Chapter 21, Part 14, Building Hostages. High Admiral Woomerson, the Themiacan admiral who had moved his allegiance to the Confederated Worlds, slowly ran his finger across the hardened beak, part of his lower lip. The Exaltan commander had done something he didn't expect, which was to choose the lives of Zoltan crew over doing some token damage to the Confederated forces. The move made sense, of course. Woomerson and his fleet stayed in FTL flight until the last possible moment, and it had become quite evident that he had no chance of slowing his ships down enough to take up orbit. Woomerson knew he, personally, would not allow ships under his own command to be in such a dire position, except for the most extreme reasons, and an attempt to punch back at a flyby fleet didn't qualify in the slightest. Both Confederated fleets cleared the planet's vicinity after launching every shuttle and drop capsule they had at the planet's ground defenders. Second Flight even managed a few surgical orbital strikes on massed Elton ground positions, and, in one case, on an assault force harassing some of their men. As his own Overwatch fleet rendezvoused with Second Flight, Woomerson eyed the plot suspiciously. The Exaltan ships had rushed in behind him to take up positions around the planet, of course, and seemed to be completely ignoring his no longer a threat fleets, which they had no hope of doing anything to anyway. Their actions were sensible, professional, and exactly what he'd expect a competent commander who valued the lives and loyalty of his men to do. It was that last part which worried him. Zoltan commanders didn't value their men's lives, except insofar as scorekeeping went, which seemed to have its own strange set of rules, much less their comfort nor loyalty. Loyalty was a given, enforced by fear, brutal discipline, and the promise of some sort of nebulous improvement in quality of life if they were lucky enough to survive. No, this commander had suddenly begun to behave out of character, and he hated it when,
"Admiral, we have the fleet from the construction yard on sensors. They are in the system and heading to intercept our path. Sir, I am still working on the vectors, but it looks like they may have a chance to force an engagement if we maintain our course. Even if they don't, sir, they are going to be far too close to us when we hit interstellar space. They will be able to track us unless we significantly change our exit point from this system."
A strange relief settled over the Admiral, even as alarm and irritation set in. The Exaltan maneuvers make sense now. If they'd continued to press us, we would have laid on our FTL drives harder when we left, and might not have slowed as much as we did over the planet. They wanted to give that incoming fleet plenty of time to sneak around the edge of the system and have a shot at cutting us off, with the assumption that we intended to flee back towards Confederated space. He looked over at his second-in-command, who just shook his head slightly and spoke in light tones.
"Oh no, we are going to have to alter course to make sure we stay away from the big, bad Sultan Relief fleet and make sure they can't see what vector we take when we flee. In fact, it looks like the best place for us to exit the system will be right there."
The point in space at the edge of the solar system that happened to be more or less the closest possible exit to the shipyard that constituted their next objective glowed bright.
"Whatever shall we do, Admiral?"
The Admiral rolled his eyes at the human's performance, quietly glad that the gesture translated better with humans than it did with Arabso. He then waved a hand at his second.
"Very well then, I think you are quite fit to carry out the maneuvers and get everyone out in good order."
The human nodded.
"Good."
He hit the comms button, which gave him a channel to all captains, and spoke so that his voice carried across his flag bridge.
"New vectors for rendezvous with First Flight and exit from this system are pending. I expect you will have them within the next 15 minutes.
He sent a querying look at his navigator, inviting her to speak up if she needed more time. She answered by raising a single eyebrow at him and pressing a single button, which caused the necessary data, already complete and checked by the computers, to flash across his screen. He had to work at it a little to keep the amusement out of his voice as he continued.
"Or maybe the next 15 seconds. In 15 minutes, I expect all ships to be ready to make course corrections. As soon as those maneuvers are completed, you are all, and I will allow no exceptions for this, including myself, to execute a shift change. I want everyone on primary battle shift off duty until we are on final approach to our next target. Let your shift officers handle the schedule juggling, by the way, captains, because that prescription applies to you too.
A ripple of amusement swept across his flag bridge as he signed off, and he let the tension of the last few days flow out of him. Oops. He then found he'd become much more tired than he thought, and a grey haze settled over his vision. He looked over at his second, who had become adept enough at reading him to see the signs.
This is fine, sir. I can handle these maneuvers easily enough and should be able to deal with any little issues that arise. I believe we got an updated report on the shipyard's defenses while we were sailing past the planet. Would you like to take some time to review them in private?
He gave the man a grateful look, nodded, stood, and managed, barely, to make it back to his quarters on what he hoped at least looked like steady legs. A few days later, the Admiral sat in his command chair and, once again, considered the same planetary system as his fleet made for it at their best speed. The attack on the shipyard had gone so well that it frightened the Admiral and his captains. The shipyard had been built with only minimal defenses, relying on its deep space position and the garrison fleet to keep it safe. His fleet had batted their minimal defenses aside like so many insects, and most of the station surrendered. Thankfully, they had a couple of ships which were near completion, and he didn't have trouble detailing a few of his men to take charge of those ships and convert them to prisoner transports before he reduced the station, and everything else in the process of being built, to dust. He had wished that they could co-opt the station for themselves, but such were the vagaries of war. Ambushing the station's fleet had been no harder. He knew their route, knew where they'd be coming from, and had the transponder codes from the prisoners who seemed almost too willing to give him what he needed. The fleet came in with shields and weapons powered down, something neither the Themirkan nor human militaries would have tolerated, and had been destroyed almost before they knew anything was wrong. Morale ran high through most of the fleet at the easy victory, but the Admiral, and most of his captains and staff, had seen too much action to trust it when the universe handed them such an easy glide. The mood on the flag bridge remained subdued. Everyone seemed to be waiting for the other feather to fall. They had just breached the heliopause on their return to the system, and he allowed himself a long, low sigh as he studied the plot and found it looked very different than it had before his previous arrival. His second let out a long, low whistle.
Admiral, I think they figured out that we are coming.
The Admiral nodded.
I don't like the way they have arrayed themselves against the planet, nor the look of that task force headed, again, to go after the miners throwing rocks. It looks like yes, there one goes. They are destroying the rocks as they progress, allowing the ships around our planet to hold position.
His chief comms officer spoke up from the pit.
Sir, I have the Zoltan commander on the line. They are relaying a signal to us through their own sensor buoys.
The Admiral motioned for the call to be routed to his console. He hit the button to accept, along with a few more to give the Zoltan on the other line a little surprise, and soon a Zoltan face hovered near his. The lizard wasted no time.
As you can see, human. Wait, no, you are not even a human.
The man shook his head and seemed to draw himself up.
I am exalted High Admiral.
Woomerson waved a hand at the man.
Yes. No doubt you have a title with more syllables in it than the meager number of brain cells in your head. You are a Sultan voter, and that is enough to tell me what I need to know, no doubt.
The exalted Heine cut him off.
I will not be spoken to in such a fashion. Feathers for brains. Now, pay attention, for I will not repeat myself. I have the high ground, as your inept kind likes to put it, even if you think you do. My fleet is positioned over every major city on the planet below me, and I will have several hours to pound those cities to dust before you and your fleet can make a rival to try and knock us off. And if you think I will hesitate to do so, then I will hesitate to do so. Then I would remind you.
The Admiral rolled his eyes, which brought a snarl from the Dalton, but he managed to speak before the idiot could continue.
That the old machines won't stop you from pummeling the cities as long as you don't do too much damage to the biosphere itself. Do I really look as dumb as you? No. Don't answer that. You want to pound those empty cities to dust. Go ahead. If you weren't an idiot, you'd have paid attention to the precision of my fleet's drops to our forces on the ground when I came through here and kicked your ass, by the way, a few days ago, and you'd realize that I'm in contact with our forces on the ground, which means that I know those cities have been successfully emptied, and you can't rack up a body count to show the council and try to declare victory.
The man tried to interrupt him, and he made a show of hitting the mute button on his console.
I will listen to you, hi whoever you are, after you hear me out. So, given the fact that you seem to be intelligent enough to form complete sentences, I am hoping that you can at least count tonnage. My fleet had you outmassed before we came through here the first time and managed to pick off a few of your ships. And you obviously know that your backup fleet is so much space dust at this point. Furthermore, you saw how badly my fleets have you outclassed and
he leaned in and gave the man his best predatory smile.
How badly I have you outclassed. That said, I am a merciful man. You have just enough time before my fleet arrives to collect your crew from the surface and withdraw from this system. If you really want to spend that time reducing a bunch of empty buildings to rubble in a childish tantrum instead, that is, of course, your own prerogative. Of course, if you do that, it will mean abandoning the troops, who are barely holding their own despite your orbital superiority, and sacrificing your own life as well.